Welcome back. This is part 4 of Passover and Easter. Thank you for tuning in to the universe of God. And this is a time to really turn into God's universe because He has caught the attention of the world during the holy time of Passover, the spring feast, the feast of unleavened bread where we get the sin out of our lives, the feast to prepare us to cross over into freedom and out of bondage and slavery. And there's so much happening right now in the prophetic scene. But we're going to continue on in this series, going over how, the Lord has fulfilled the scriptures, how we see the scriptures pointing to Messiah ben Joseph, who is Jesus. I don't want anybody to be confused. We are talking about Jesus. Just like God has many names, Jesus has many names. He's not many people. He has many names that reflect his character and glory. So nothing new there, but we're going over this time of Passover because the Lord, has allowed a plague to hit our world and close down our countries. And, I'm not saying that he created the crown virus of the crown, but he allowed it nonetheless. And so that everything works to the glory of God, and he is still in control, and his purpose and will be done. And that's why we are all on pause and in our homes, looking within, and some not, of course, but looking to God during this time when he is getting our attention for a time of passing over. Now, we were talking about the 4 cups. And so now we're going to go a little bit further into these 4 cups. Now, some of you may recognize the letters on those 4 cups with the YHWH. Now, W and V are interchangeable, and V and B can be interchangeable, different languages and different contexts. But anyhow, the YHWH is Yod He Vav He, and I use the V because it's Yod He Vav He, and when you just keep it a W, it's really Yahweh, or also Yahuwah. And so you'll see the letters in blue and red spell out Yahuwah. But these are all the same person. The tetragrammaton is the Yod He Vav He. And there's just so much packed into that. But it's pointing you to the I am. Okay? The one true God. The God of the universe. Now, the Lord's Supper and the 4 cups is a symbolic representation. There is one in the New Testament about this. So we talked about, how it's the sanctification, the cup of sanctification, and we're going to go a little bit further into these cups. But number 1, okay, the symbolic representations in the New Testament of these 4 cups in the Lord's Supper. Number 1 is sanctification. It says, and he took the cup and gave thanks and said, take this and divide it among yourselves. This is in Luke 22:17. And then the second cup, the cup of wrath or affliction, is poured out. And it says, do not drink, for Messiah drank this for us. Jesus drank the second cup, declaring he is the Messiah who is drinking the cup of affliction. And for some of you who are aware when I say Messiah ben Joseph, Messiah ben Joseph is referred to as the son of Joseph, right? Because Joseph was his stepfather, the one God called to raise Jesus. So Messiah ben Joseph is the suffering servant. He came the first time to suffer. He comes the second time as Messiah ben David. He comes the second time to rule and reign as king. So Jesus, drinking the second cup, really, he is acknowledging that he is the suffering servant. Now, the blessing, salvation, and redemption filled to overflowing. This cup is the New Testament and my blood, which is shed for you. This is in Luke 22:20. This cup is not drank until the end of the Passover meal. So then we go to the fourth cup. It's turned upside down, and it's to be drank at the second coming of Messiah in the millennium. So just stay with me on this. The four cups are also a representation of the journey of leaving Egypt under bondage and slavery to the everlasting covenant, looking to eternity. So we talked about the Old Testament being a foreshadowing of the New Testament. They call the Old Testament the concealed, and the New Testament is the revealed. And the New Testament reveals Jesus to us, and Jesus reveals the scriptures to us and fulfills them. We have to understand the scriptures not only just in their literal terms and in terms of history and how the pieces are coming together, but spiritually, okay? Because I always point us to the Spirit. Now, there are 3 compartments with pieces of matzah. This is a tradition of men. Now, these 3 compartments are unleavened bread crackers, and they're put in between cloths and set on a table at the Last Supper, which is the Passover meal, and none of them are broken. In tradition, in the Hebraic tradition, the father or grandfather would take out this middle piece and break it in 2 pieces. Representations here of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Okay. The middle piece was put in a linen cloth and hid in the home. And after the meal, the children would go to find it. Whoever found the middle piece would receive a significant reward. And Jesus is the bread of life. He's this unleavened bread. He's the one without sin. He's the bread of life, and there's no yeast in him. There's no leaven, okay? Because he has no sin. He is the lamb that was not only slain, but he was considered blemish-free, spotless, and worthy of the sacrifice. So Jesus is the bread of life. And he broke the 2 pieces and said that it was his body that was broken for them. This is in the Last Supper. He was beaten, broken, and afflicted for us at his crucifixion. Jesus was the middle piece of the bread on the table in this Hebraic tradition. And like the Father would hide the middle piece, Jesus was hid in the grave. So traditionally, the Hebrews, the Jews, are reflecting again Messiah to us. They're reflecting Jesus, the Son of God, the Savior. They're reflecting this storyline, this Passover meal. They're reflecting this back to us in their traditions. So let's go to where the third cup is drank. It is drank by the disciples, which is the communion. Matthew 26, verse 26 through 29 says, "And as they were eating, Jesus took the bread, and he blessed it, and he broke it, and he gave it to the disciples. And he said, take and eat. This is my body. And he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, drink all of it. For this is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. But I say unto you, I will not drink henceforth of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." Now, the fourth cup is to be drank by the bride of Christ. It is also called the cup of Elijah because the cup of Elijah comes before Christ at the second coming. The children would also go to the door and look both ways for Elijah when they got to the fourth cup in the Jewish Passover tradition. Now, I believe, that in this third cup, Jesus is the one to drink it. And I think Jesus refuses to drink it because even though it's for him, I believe he's refusing to drink this wine because he is remaining spotless without blemish. And the wine he will drink will be the new wine that is not like the earthly wine. And this is significant. He would not even take the wine, into his body. He would not do anything to defile it. Okay. I think it was Samson's mother who was not to drink any fermented drink, Samson or Samuel, one of them. But nonetheless, this is, his way of not defiling his person, not, doing anything to take away the qualification for this sacrifice. So, this is all coming together to beautifully depict the truth about the Passover and how Jesus fulfilled the Passover down to the Last Supper and even communion, and how even though the third cup was for him to drink, he would not defile himself. And it is, this is drank by the disciples during communion. And then we see the fourth cup is for the bride of Christ. This is a new cup of wine, and it's waiting, to be drank by the Messiah. Basically, the one who qualifies, just like the one that Revelation says is qualified to open the seals, is the same one who's qualified to drink this fourth cup. Now, this pretty much concludes the discussion of the Passover, going through the scriptures and how Jesus fulfilled it. But before we end this part of our series about Passover and Easter, we want to go into Easter. I want to talk about the origin of Easter, because we've talked about the Passover, and today Christians worldwide have taken on a new tradition and have for a very long time, and it's called the tradition of Easter. And in the beginning of this series, we talked about the traditions of God and the traditions of men. And what's interesting is we just discussed the traditions of God. And another thing that is interesting is that some of these traditions of God are mere reflected in how the Christians celebrate Easter. But let's go into Easter. We want to know, where does this term come from, and does it even matter? So Easter was originally considered a pagan festival, and the word Easter is really of Saxon origin and comes from Eastera, or Istra. Now, this is the goddess of spring, okay, a pagan goddess of spring, in whose honor sacrifices were offered about the time of Passover every year. Now, what's really interesting, we should pay attention, is that during this time of Passover, for, the world, different religions are doing different things during this time. And this pagan festival that also comes in the spring, is happening during this same holy time, okay, of Passover. Now, according to some scholars, such as Dr. Tony Nugent, teacher of theology and religious studies at Seattle University and Presbyterian minister, okay, he says the Easter story comes from the Sumerian or Babylon after the flood. So Sumeria is Babylon after the flood. So they're one and the same territory. And what's interesting is we're already talking about Babylon. So this Easter story comes from Babylon. Now, this Easter story comes from the legend of Tammuz, which God mentions Tammuz in the Bible, and he's upset that the women are crying for Tammuz. Anyhow, it comes from the legend of Dumuzi or Tammuz and his wife Inanna, which is also Ishtar. Now, and this is an epic myth called the Descent of Inanna. It's found inscribed on cuneiform clay tablets dating back to 2100 BC. Now, when Tammuz dies, Ishtar is grief-stricken and follows him to the underworld. In the underworld, she enters through 7 gates, and her worldly attire is removed. Naked and bowed low, she is judged, killed, and then hung on display. And in her absence, the earth loses its fertility, crops cease to grow, and animals stop reproducing. Unless something is done, all of the earth will end. Now, we're going to come back in part 5 of the series, and we're going to go further into this origin of Easter. Thanks for tuning in, and God bless.